going back to the metaphor, the lenses are the environment itself that one grows up in. And then the eyes are the self that are constructing, I guess, organizing information to get a better understanding of where one lives and, like you said, the place in the world. Like, where do
Yeah.
I fit in all of this, right? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Out of the Box podcast, where Steele and I get to talk about outside of the box ideas. Today, we have a really cool topic. We're actually going to be talking about you. Well, not you, but the self. So, what constructs the self? What goes into building ourselves, right? Like, how are we constructed? What are different, components to what makes a human being a human being? So to start it off, Seal, if you want to kick it off,
Yep.
and just as a reminder for our viewers, if you do like our content and you really like this channel, please, we would greatly appreciate it if you can give us a like and also subscribe to our channel so we can continue providing more outside the box ideas. But without further ado, Steele, kick it off.
Yeah. So when we think about the self, we often think about that we have control or that we have had control in the past of, creating ourselves, creating our personality, creating kind of like more or less the beliefs that we have about reality and about the world. Um, and it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what the self is, just as a basic definition, right? So I could imagine there being several different definitions across the board, and so
Yeah.
you could define the self as a set of beliefs about the world, but you could also define it as personality, but you could also define it as consciousness, awareness of my identity and my place in this world. Like, I don't know, what do you think of it? How
Mhm.
would you kind of define self off the top of your
Define.
head, or what you've heard other people say maybe?
Yeah, I guess like when we talk about the stuff, sometimes, depending on the people you're talking about, it can lead on to like how we've explained it a little bit, like consciousness. The fact that we are aware makes us, a self, an individual being, I guess, in a way, right? So I guess it comes to like self-awareness uh of being alive, I guess, if that makes sense. Like that creates the self, not only the image but also the values. Being aware is basically what the conscience is doing, just being aware of the surroundings. We see that through the development of children. They just become aware of where they are in the world,
Yeah, would you
kind of
say
like you
identity?
said, finding one's
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, one's
I'm sorry.
place. Yeah, like one's place in
Yeah.
the universe, in the world, definitely, and
Hmm.
in relation to other people. But
Yes.
yeah, like, so I was saying is like, would you say the self is like an identity, or either that or identity plays part of a bigger picture in the self? I don't know.
Yeah, I think identity is like you said, a component. I think it's
One of
like the
many.
umbrella itself is the self, and then it has identity, it has values, it has, the world's expectations, you know basically everything around it. But the self is basically the lens of
The lens,
where
yeah.
every, like, it's the lenses themselves,
The
not
thing that it
not the
focuses.
not
Yeah,
what you're like seeing
I
specifically.
see.
It's
I
the
see what you're
lens
saying.
itself.
Yeah,
It's kind of like when you, or I would say maybe it's more like the self are the eyes and the lenses are everything else, that you begin to
that's
see.
a that's an interesting metaphor actually, because it makes some sense, right? So you're saying like, yeah, the self is, right here, but the lens is everything else. It has an impact, or it affects the self and influences the self. And I think what
Hmm.
you're getting at with that is the lenses are the beliefs that are put onto us about from society,
Ooh,
from other people. That's what we're going to get into next, right?
oh man,
Is
what kind of lenses are we
how
born with?
and that's what I
Ah,
was
that's
setting it up for,
crazy.
right?
That's a
Is that's what I was building up to, right? Is like what you're saying right there is like the world, we don't create ourselves, we don't create our personality necessarily. The world around us creates the self that we become. Someone who's raised in a home, in an abusive home, is going to develop a different sense of self than someone who's raised in a loving home. Someone who's raised in a foster care system whose both parents passed away, they're gonna have a
yeah.
different view of themselves. If they were bullied, let's say, compared to someone who grew up in a normal middle class family who was never bullied their whole life, they're gonna have a different sense of self, you know. And so I think that's what we're gonna jump into next is our self image comes from other people, and self image is one component of many of the self. There's self esteem, which is just quickly defining it. So self esteem is like how we feel emotionally about ourselves. Do we feel worthless? Do we feel like we're worthwhile? And everything in between worthless and worthwhile is the kind of like spectrum, I guess you could call it, of how we feel in terms of self esteem. And then self efficacy. Self efficacy gets confused with self esteem, but it's actually how much we believe that we can accomplish a skill, accomplish a task. It's how much we believe in ourselves to do something. That's what self-efficacy is. And then, like I just mentioned, self-image. So maybe like a mental picture or a mental kind of imagine like idea of how we look physically and how we come off to other people. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what that is, because I know you kind of we kind of both studied that a little bit in communication studies, just very briefly. And then, of course, the other two main things that I would say influence the self, maybe they're not, maybe they're part of the self in some way. Beliefs and perceptions, you know, because beliefs, I think that's what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are the lenses. The perceptions and beliefs are the lenses, right? So those are like the
Yeah.
components that I
Yeah.
think.
What you're grown with, yeah, like what you grow up into the environment itself,
Yeah,
which, eventually gives you those beliefs and values and stuff like that. So I would say that, going back to the metaphor, the lenses are the environment itself that one grows up in. And then the eyes are the self that are constructing, I guess, organizing information to get a better understanding of where one lives and, like you said, the place in the world. Like, where do
yeah,
I fit in all of this, right? In the cosmos. There's so much that there is out there, but what do I have specifically that I can give to the world, right? Or
yeah.
that I can become
And it's so hard
so
to
I
capture
can
that.
join.
Yeah, it's hard to
Yeah.
capture what you're saying. Like we can think of it like we're talking about right now in abstract terms. It's so
Yeah,
hard
it's
to make it more just like consciousness as we
more
found.
tangible.
Yeah, because I mean, it's more complicated than even what we just everything we talked about is complicated enough. But when you talk about your relation to other people in the world, then you dive into Bowlby's attachment theory in psychology and his theories of insecure versus secure attachments, which I've told you about this a long time ago, back in St. Mary's University, where the form where a child's development, like early infant, very young child, like the way that the parents treat the child or the caregivers
Hmm.
treat the child, the attachment they form is dependent upon how they treat the child growing up. And then that actually programs over 50% of what the child's personality and beliefs are about the world. I remember telling you that, then you're like, what? I was like, no,
Yeah.
that's what we found. And so when you talk about what you're saying in relation to the world, then we have to jump into attachment theory of psychology. Does the child, and then who becomes an adult, grow up with an insecure attachment style, which can be anxious, ambivalent, avoidant. So avoidant, they avoid emotions when they come up because they were taught to avoid emotions by their parents because every time they expressed emotion, they
Ooh.
were punished. Or anxious, ambivalent, their parents they didn't have consistent punishment, so they don't know whether they're ever doing anything right or wrong because they get punished when they do things right, but they also get punished when they do things wrong. So they become
Mm.
anxious, ambivalent attachment. So they don't know, they never know how to please people, so they grow up with a lot of anxiety around social relationships. But then you have secure, which is the most ideal attachment. And that affects your image of yourself, right? Because if you believe that you're raised in a loving, caring family that had consistent discipline, but not harsh discipline, that's a secure
Hmm.
attachment. And just quickly running through that, basically what I'm coming to on that is if you have that secure attachment, you're less likely to believe that other people are going to harm you. So you're more easily going to form positive, healthy relationships. So that all, to me, even those attachment things affect how you view yourself and how you view yourself compared to other people. So it's like,
Hmm. And so, are you saying that maybe identity is is the self, or is it a component that comes after,
yeah,
being part of the world?
I agree with what you were saying earlier about identity being a component because the self, from what I've seen, at least from what I've noticed, there it's a separate definition from the definition of an identity. I just don't know. I mean, to me, like if I'm just ignoring all that, it does seem like the identity would be the same as the self. I'm
Yeah,
not
because
sure.
sometimes I think sometimes it definitely does get confused, right? Like
Yeah.
identity would be the perspective of who you are in the world, right? The perspective itself, but the self is the human itself. I guess, like the consciousness itself, like
Subjective.
the original canvas, the white canvas, you
Yeah,
know?
first person
The
point of
self
view.
is the white canvas, and then identity is everything that gets painted on it, basically.
I could see
Like,
that you grab
you
onto
know?
those different labels, different stereotypes, the different beliefs about who certain types of people are, maybe, and then you start applying it to yourself
Yeah.
if you fit into a certain niche in the world.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think so? There's, I mean, would you agree that, or with the idea that the self is in itself the consciousness of, you know,
Yeah.
like a blank canvas, or do you think that there's other things that we're already born with, in that
Oh,
consciousness that
that's
make
a good
everyone
question.
different?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I used to kind of believe that we were just a blank slate when we're first born, our mind and our
Hmm.
personality and our identity. I'm not so sure anymore because after studying lifespan development in psychology, I took a whole class on that. Man, that was some heavy material. It starts all the way from conception onwards, so it's really detailed. And I remember the part that struck me in that class was talking about epigenetics and nature versus nurture, but not nature versus nurture. Now it's nature and nurture working together. And basically, the prenatal stage when the baby's developing in the womb, genetics are, the mother's communicating with the baby through the umbilical cord, and then you have all the things that she eats and consumes. If a mother does drugs or alcohol, that can also affect the genes that develop in the baby when the baby's growing in the
Mm.
womb, and other chemicals. There was a time when there was a certain birth control pill, I think. Or no, no, not a birth control pill. It was a pill to help with nausea because of pregnancy, I think, and it actually caused harm to the fetus. So they had to,
Oh, wow.
you know, get rid of that. That's dangerous. Don't do that anymore. So we learn through mistakes and we learn through
Mm.
stuff like that. But yeah, no, like I think to say they're born with a clean slate's hard because we know that genetics are
Or
still
maybe
happening in the womb.
maybe using the metaphor itself, maybe they're just, it's a white, it's still a blank canvas with just a different shape, you know
Yeah,
where, like one might be square, another one might be triangle, so the same thing that you paint on the rectangular square won't fit the same way in a triangle canvas. You'll have to kind of accommodate to that,
yeah.
you know
Everyone's unique in some sense.
and so we're born with blank canvases but with different shapes,
Yeah, unique
you know
shapes, but the canvas, I think what you're getting at is it gets filled, and as we get older and as we have life
yeah.
with the environment, with nurture, but nurture can turn
And so,
on and
like,
off genes too.
kind of like saying, like, because you're kind of explaining that the genes in itself, affect our way of, you know developing self-awareness, right? Our
And
consciousness
that's
is in
that's actually
itself.
what I'm confused about because
That
I'm not sure. I haven't. I'm not a geneticist. I haven't studied it deeply enough to know for sure, but I know that genes affect certain things that can then do chain reactions and affect other things. I don't know whether they really affect personality itself or identity. That's a hard question. That's actually, I don't know. I mean, but And the reason why I find it confusing and complicated is because I think back to how some genes may increase the chances of getting schizophrenia or getting depression or getting anxiety or developing social anxiety. And those of themselves affect the way we view ourselves. Depression makes you view yourself as inferior. Anxiety makes you view others in relation to you as scary, kind of, like, and so yeah, it makes you, and that's the thing, it's more complicated than that because genes, we're not 100% sure that there's any one specific gene that causes depression or one gene that causes schizophrenia. It's usually a combination, but it's so complicated. Like we can't definitively say it's only genes that causes that. But yeah, no, that's just why I'm like
Mm.
not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. I guess I was just trying to see, like, when people are born, do they have, you know, eh, I mean, we know that genetics in itself does play a big role in how, everybody is different, right? Because, everyone that is born and alive today has never experienced the same DNA makeup ever in life, right? Like there's always a constant variation, mixing of new genes, as kids are born, even with twins, there's still, DNA differences between one twin and the other, right? And so which is interesting, like there has never been somebody else with the same DNA makeup as you, and there will never be someone with the same DNA makeup as you ever again, right? Which is
Right.
so interesting. So it makes me you think, like, so well, we have a pretty unique DNA makeup. Nobody else has it, right? And so with that, like, just my ability to create like be aware of the world and have, develop my consciousness, does that differ from other people? And like, I guess we can define consciousness as, the, I guess maybe like how we like the I guess how some people say the soul, right, that lives within us. But what is aware within us that perceives life, right, or perceives things around us, right? Or what would
Right.
you say consciousness stands for? That way we can kind of like explain it to the viewers that might not understand or not know what consciousness is.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, well, as we're wrapping up, I'll go ahead and define that. So, like, consciousness, I feel like can get easily confused with the self because it feels like the same thing. So, I think what you're at, I think what you're asking, right, is like, how do we define consciousness, or like, kind of like that? Yeah,
Yeah, how do we describe consciousness to understand, how we can better develop the self?
yeah. I think one of the most common definitions of consciousness that a lot of people agree with is that it's awareness. When we say we're aware of something right now, we're conscious of something right now. And it's not just that, but we're aware, consciousness, awareness of what physical sensations I feel with my five senses, what emotions I feel, what thoughts I have, how I feel about myself right now. Consciousness, awareness. So that's why I think
Mm,
of consciousness as awareness, but an awareness that I believe can control things in some way, and in a sense that I
yeah,
believe in free
because
will.
if you think about it, so kind of going off of that, I know we're wrapping up, but if somebody's born deaf or blind, for example, you know, their ability to create consciousness is going to be different because they're going to rely on different senses
Yeah, it's
to
limited.
create their perspective of reality, right? And with that, their identity will be different, the things that they value will be different. And so it kind of, intermixes. But it starts almost with the blank slate that you're born with, and the shape of it, that is going to define like what strokes of paint are going to be painted on the canvas,
Yeah,
right?
the paint of
As it
personality.
develops.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
paint being like personality, identity, and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Personal reality, personality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for listening in. I think this was a very thought-provoking conversation. And let us know what you thought on the comments. What do you think, really composes the self? Is there other things that you would add to it? Or maybe other things that you would like to go deeper on? Let us know. And also, if you did like this video, please give us a thumbs up, a like down below, and also subscribe to our channel, because we're definitely committed to continue providing some amazing content for you guys. So until next time, we will see you soon.